Today, we're diving straight into what I like to call the architecture of character. We're going to demystify one of the most profound, practical, and honestly heavily misunderstood frameworks for building a truly good life, Aristotle's virtue ethics. You see, instead of giving us this rigid, boring checklist of rules to follow, ancient Greek philosophy actually provides us with a really dynamic blueprint for human development. It doesn't just ask, hey, what should I do right now? But rather, what sort of person should I actually be?
All right, so let's kick things off with a quote you've almost certainly heard a million times before. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. You see this plastered on gym walls, printed on your favorite coffee mug, and quoted in just about every single modern self-help book ever published. And I mean, it sounds totally Aristotelian, right? It feels exactly like some ancient wisdom handed down straight from the Lyceum. Well, here is the massive plot twist. Aristotle literally never wrote that. Not a single word of it. That specific phrase was actually coined way later, in 1926, by a philosopher named Will Durant in his book The Story of Philosophy. Durant was brilliantly synthesizing a very complex set of ancient Greek concepts into a punchy, modern maxim. But to truly grasp the absolute depth of what Aristotle meant about excellence and character, we have to look past the catchy modern bumper sticker and really dig into the foundational ideas. We have to understand the ultimate goal of human life. And that ultimate goal? It's called Eudaimonia. Now, you'll often see this lazily translated as just happiness, but it's really not. It's not that fleeting rush of euphoria you get when you eat a perfect slice of pizza or when your favorite team wins a game. Think of it more as a stable, enduring state of complete human flourishing. It's thriving. It's living well over the course of an entire life. And this perfectly illustrates why you can't just accidentally stumble into eudaimonia. It requires you to actively fulfill your potential. But, okay, that raises a pretty massive question. What exactly is human potential? Well, to answer that, Aristotle uses what he calls the functional account of the good.
Basically, Aristotle argues that to know what makes a good anything, you have to know its ergon, its core function, or its characteristic activity. For example, a good knife is just one that cuts really well, right? So, what is the function of a human? Let's start at the very bottom of the biological ladder to figure this out. A plant's primary function is simply nutrition, growth, and reproduction. A plant is flourishing when it's absorbing water, getting sunlight, and growing. But obviously, humans do a whole lot more than just grow.
So, move up a rung on the biological ladder to non-human animals. They share all those plant-like nutritive functions, sure, but they add something totally new into the mix: sensation, perception, and the ability to actually move around their environment. A flourishing animal is eating and growing, yes, but it's also sensing and navigating the physical world. Yet, as humans, we do all of that too. We eat, we grow, we sense, we move. If we want to find the uniquely human function, we have to look even further.
Which brings us to a really critical juncture. What exactly is the unique function of a human being? What is the one specific capacity that completely sets humanity apart from the plants and the animals? Like, what is our defining trait?
Here's the punchline: our unique function is active reasoning and deliberate choice. It is our rational soul. But listen, Aristotle isn't just talking about sitting in a dark room solving complex algebra equations. He's talking about practical reason. Using your reason to actively guide your actions and your choices out in the messy, complicated real world. The truly excellent human is the one who actually uses reason well to govern their emotions and their decisions. But doing this well, that requires having the right character.
Now, this brings us to a massive translation issue that has confused people for literal centuries. We so often translate the Greek word hexis into the English word habit. But think about it. In modern English, a habit is kind of passive, right? It's a mindless routine, like biting your nails or keeping a bird trapped in a cage. But Aristotle's hexis is completely different. A hexis is an active condition. It's a stance you deliberately hold. Think of one of those weighted kids' toys that pops right back upright the second you knock it over. It's this stable equilibrium of the soul that you hold actively, so you can choose an action knowingly. You don't perform a virtue on autopilot, you consciously choose it. So how in the world do we actually get this stable, active state of character? Well, we get it through a process called eidesmos, or habituation. Aristotle noticed that we aren't just magically born courageous or temperate or just. We're uniquely adapted by nature to receive these virtues, absolutely, but we only make them perfect through rigorous practice.
Eudaimonia is this lifelong process where we repeatedly perform virtuous actions until our emotional responses completely align with our rational choices. You don't just put on a brave face and act brave, you train yourself to actually feel the appropriate level of fear and confidence.
And this brings us to the ultimate skill analogy. Building moral character is exactly like learning to play the piano. You can't just read a book about pianos and bam, you're suddenly Mozart. First, as a kid, you awkwardly follow the rules your piano teacher gives you without really understanding the beautiful music you're trying to make. Second, you repeatedly perform the actions, the boring scales, the simple chords. And then finally, after immense, repetitive practice, the skill becomes totally natural. The piano just becomes an extension of yourself. Virtue works the exact same way.
So if virtue is this active stance we develop through practice, how do we even know what to practice so we don't completely veer off course? Enter the doctrine of the mean. Aristotle says every ethical virtue is basically an intermediate condition, a golden mean between two total extremes. One extreme is a vice of deficiency, and the other is a vice of excess. If you face a dangerous situation with way too much fear and a total deficiency of confidence, that's the vice of cowardice. But if you face danger with zero fear and excessive, foolish confidence, well, that's the vice of recklessness. Courage is that perfectly calibrated middle ground. The exact same thing goes for money, right? Generosity or liberality is the golden mean between being painfully stingy and wildly, recklessly prodigal.
Now, this is totally crucial. This golden mean is incredibly relative to the individual and the specific situation. It is definitely not some rigid mathematical average. Aristotle actually uses the really great example of an athlete's diet. The exact mathematical midpoint between eating 10 pounds of food and 2 pounds of food is 6 pounds. But look, 6 pounds might be way too much for you or me, but for an Olympic wrestler, that's just breakfast. Finding the golden mean means figuring out the right action toward the right person to the exact right degree at the perfect time for the right reason. It is incredibly contextual.
And because that golden mean constantly shifts depending on the context, we need a navigation tool to actually find it. That tool is called Phronesis, or practical wisdom. Phronesis is technically an intellectual virtue, but it acts as the bridge straight to our moral character. It's basically your internal moral compass. It's the deep understanding and capacity to look at a super messy, real-world problem and successfully zero in on that shifting golden mean to promote human flourishing.
So why is phronesis so absolutely essential? Well, because you literally cannot get it from a textbook. It requires deep, lived experience, what the Greeks called empiria. A textbook can tell you that courage is good, sure, but only real, on-the-ground, practical wisdom and lived experience can tell you if a specific situation calls for aggressively speaking up or, tactfully staying quiet. It's what bridges our general moral knowledge with our practical, right here, right now actions. It really is the ultimate executive function of a virtuous life.
Which actually brings us beautifully full circle back to Will Durant's synthesis from 1926. Knowing what we know now about the active stance of hexis, the lifelong training process of ethysmos, the careful navigation of the golden mean, and the guiding light of Phronesis, Durant's modern summary absolutely nailed it. Excellence truly is an art won by training. We don't magically act rightly because we were born possessing virtue. We possess virtue because we have systematically, intentionally trained ourselves to act rightly.
So here's the biggest takeaway. Your character is completely unfixed. It's not just handed to you by fate. It's an architecture you are actively building, literally brick by brick, with every single choice you make. That pop-up toy of your character is shaped entirely by how you choose to hold your stance today. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. If you really are what you repeatedly do, what character are you building today?